Okay, it's great to have everybody back. We are continuing now with Jewish history. So we're up to the year 100 BC, 160 BCE. You can really divide the second temple period into four parts. You have the beginning of the Hashmonean period. You have the Hellenistic period, followed by the Hashmonean period, followed by the Roman period, and then the destruction. So we're holding now by the Hashmonean period, which seemed like a good thing. We're making it into sort of a big deal, but it was a train wreck in slow motion, as I've heard. It's not my phrase, but I think it's not my line, but it's a great line. So in the year 160 BCE, you have the Great Revolt led by Yehuda Maccabee. Now this defeat by the Maccabees, the Hashmonean family, a priestly family, versus the Syrian Hellenistic army. It wasn't exactly Greece. It was Syria, by Seleucid, yeah. The Seleucid, you had Ptolemy in the south, who's going to team up with Mark Antony. And then you have Seleucid in the north. These were the two generals of Alexander the Great. They spreaded Hellenism. They didn't spread Greece, but Hellenism. Syria was a Hellenistic country trying to influence Israel. So there was a great revolt by the Maccabees. It was like literally 200 people versus 200 flabby-skinned Torah scholars versus the United States. We're talking about incredible defeat. It really did get the Jewish people back. It really, like, a sense of nationalism, but it didn't last very long. The Hashmonean period was 100 years, and it became completely independent as time went on. There was a series of battles right after the defeat, this great defeat and the rededication of the temple, but ultimately the Hashmonean were able to push away the Hellenist regime. And how did it do that? First of all, Yehuda Maccabee, the guy who led the revolt, he died 2 years after the rededication of the temple. So who took over? His brother Yonasan. Yonasan was pretty good. He was very good. He really got the people learning Torah again and established a culture and an economy, and pretty much started ruling as a king. Now, only the tribe of Judah, Yehuda, can be king. Once King David was king, God said kingship will only be from his line. And the priests come from the tribe of Levi, right? Aaron was a Kohen. Moses was a Levi. So only those are the ones that are designated for service in the temple. But for kingship, that is only for Judah. So, but they started acting like king, even though they didn't really, they didn't claim themselves to be king, although they will later. For now, they didn't claim themselves to be king. You can describe the first temple period as a monarchy, and then you can describe the second temple period as a Kohenocracy. Really, the Kohanim are the ones taking over. Okay, so Yonasan passes away eventually, then his brother Shimon takes over. This is about 20 years later, after the revolt. Shimon starts minting coins of himself. We actually have coins of Shimon HaKohen, minted coins, which is reserved for kings. You don't mint coins for yourself unless you're a king. So we already see something's happening over here. About 30 years later, the Hashmonean kingdom started gaining more and more control. And not only that, they start conquering other places. Where are they getting their supplies from? And where are they getting their military intelligence? Rome. Rome is becoming a superpower, and they're not so interested in taking over the Judean area, but Israel is the gateway to the east. So they're on the eastern border of the Mediterranean. Rome is, Italy is somewhere like in the middle east, I guess, Middle East, whatever, Middle East of the Mediterranean. So if you want to do business with China, and India, really India and whatnot, you had to go through Israel. So everyone was very happy to keep, Rome was very happy to keep the borders open so that they can have free trade routes. So they started giving us weapons, intelligence, money, and the Hashmonean are really using out for their own control. Yehuda was the son of Shimon, and he's basically going to take over now. In the year 130 BCE, we're just doing headlines over here, right? We're not going to get into deep details. About 30 years after the destruction, the great defeat, the Hashmoneans have made strong treaties with Rome, and you have a guy named Yochanan Horkinus. Some people call him John Horkinus, takes over as king. He's the son of Shimon. Now, the name Horkinus itself is a Hellenistic name. Now, whether he really called himself Yochanan Horkinus or that was the name they gave him, a Hellenistic name, a very secular name, tells you a lot about the person. That it was a description of who he was, that he was really influenced by secular society. The Kohanim, the priests, the Hashmonean, they were the ultimate in status. They had social status, they were wealthy, they were powerful, and even from a spiritual standpoint, they were Kohanim and priests. So they were able to pat themselves on both sides of the back. We are beautiful, we're rich, we're famous, we are spiritual, even if they're not very spiritual, but like we have it, we can trace our lineage. It's called yichus. We have lineage over here. Yeah, they were like the Kennedys, lahavdil. And they start John Horkinus really starts ruling over places. He's acting like a full-on king. Now Pompey, who was the leader of Rome at the time, really had no interest in Judea, but Yochanan and Yehuda Aristobulus were brothers, and they were fighting for power. And Yehuda was much more influential, and he was much more powerful. Pompey became very nervous, and he felt that he was going to lose control. If Yehuda takes over, his ability to influence the area is going to be diminished. So he steps in, and he jails Yehuda Aristobulus, so that the weaker one, Yochanan, will be weaker in character, will be a puppet, will be sort of a puppet for Rome, and that's actually what happens. But the people who sided with Yehuda and the people that sided with Yochanan were fighting, and there was a civil war, and the Jewish people made a mistake. They allowed Pompey, they said, Pompey, why don't you come in and be the mediator, which is like Israel asking the superpower, the United States, to mediate all of their issues. Sounds good, and it sounds easy, but it's a recipe for disaster, because then you're never able to stand on your own 2 feet, and you're going to have incredible influence by the superpower on the decisions that you make in your country. And when really they're in the best interest of the United States, they're not really in the best interest of your country. So this is going to set up, this is basically the beginning of the end of Israeli independence, Hashmonean independence, and Rome is ultimately going to take over. But this is what ends up happening. Pompey comes in, he really solidifies the deal of Yochanan becoming the Kohen Gadol, and as well as king, and they really start conquering places. Now, Yochanan makes a big blunder over here. To the south of Israel is the nation of Edom, I guess, but Idumea. And Yochanan forces a forced conversion on all of the people to the south. He gives them a bris milah. We spoke about it last week. He gives them all a circumcision, if you're a male, and he throws everybody into the Jordan River. And he forcibly converts them to Judaism, and this was not very happy. This was not really accepted by many people. Pompey was extremely irritated by this, and he wanted Yochanan out. He felt that he was becoming a bit rogue, and first of all, that's not our religion here in Rome. Please do not do that. And as this is happening, there are two views of Judaism emerging. There is what's called the Sadducees, the Tzaddokim, which you spoke about. They claim heritage to Rabbi Yeshua Hatzadok, who was the original Zionist who came from Babylonia, to Israel. He was from the Kohen Gadol. So the Sadducees say that everything in Judaism is really about the temple. It's always about sacrifices, it's about the Kohanim, about the priests. Now, they were mainly made up of, the Sadducees were basically just Kohanim, priests, that enjoyed status. They had a lot of money, they had status, they had good lineage, and they really just drank they had like the power, and they wanted it. And they were a minority, but they were so wealthy that they had a great influence. And they were smooth talkers. They were just like the wealthy bureaucrats that the people, I guess they were easily influenced by. So they were a big thorn. The Sadducees are coming up, the Tzaddokim. And then you have the Perushim. It's translated as the Pharisees, I guess you could say. Yeah, the Perushim, and those are the Chachamim that we really know of today, the sages of today, that say, no, it's not about Judaism's focal point is not the temple, and it's not sacrifices. It's very important, and most of the mitzvahs are connected to the temple and the Kohen Gadol and the Kohen and all these different things, but it's really about Torah study, and it's not, to be at the top does not mean you have to be a Kohen. To be at the top is a merit-based. To be a Torah scholar, it's merit-based. We see that actually from the Chumash itself, that Moses' family were not Moses' children did not inherit his leadership, even though he wanted it to. He wanted it. It passed on to Yeshua from the tribe of Ephraim. It was a merit-based. He was the greatest scholar. He was the most humble. Joshua, who we'll speak about probably in a few weeks, and that whole saga that's going on. And that's really the main thing. And there's going to be a bit of a fight over here. Now, Rome is going to be interested in the Sadducees, obviously, because the Sadducees just want money and fame and fortune, and they really believe in conservative Judaism. They don't believe in this whole oral tradition. It's all made up. Why? Because it really takes away power from them, and it's going to be a bit of a problem. So fine. The Hashmonean in the beginning, the actual Hashmonean family, at first sided with the Perushim. So there were Kohanim that were part of the Sadducees, but the Hashmonean believed that the Perushim, we're going to side with the Perushim. Why? Because it's really probably the majority. Yochanan eventually dies, and his son, he's succeeded by his brother, Yehuda Aristobulus. And Yehuda Aristobulus claims himself to be king and high priest. Once he gets into being the king, once he gets into the position, he ends up wanting to be king, and he started killing anybody who challenged his authority. He actually locked up his mother and his brother, and he starved his mother to death because she was trying to influence, put influence on her. So he was not a good guy. He married a woman named Shlom Tzion, and she's going to come and play a big role. She's probably going to be the first queen that we ever have. Her husband dies, so Yochanan ends up passing away, and she ends up marrying. Sorry, this is Yochanan, the son of. This is Yehuda, the son of Yochanan. That would make sense. Yehuda, the son of Yochanan. Yehuda ends up dying, and his brother, Alexander Yanai, comes into play over here. And there's a big scandal. She marries Alexander Yanai. Alexander Yanai is the brother of Yehuda. He ends up becoming Kohen Gadol, and it's a big scandal. What's the scandal? A Kohen Gadol is only allowed to marry a virgin. Now, actually, clearly in the Torah, it doesn't say that he has to marry a virgin. It says that the bride has to be a virgin. So in other words, if she was ever married, she can never have been married. But technically, she could have been intimate with someone and never gotten married, and then from the Torah's perspective, could have can marry a Kohen Gadol. But the Chachamim learn out from here, the sages learn out from here that the fact that, what do you mean? That's a whole different issue if she's sleeping around and she's not married. For sure she can't marry the Torah is not very clear about it, because for sure she's not allowed to marry a Kohen Gadol. Okay, whatever. Alexander Yanai didn't really care so much. There was a big scandal. Perhaps he forcibly married Shlom Tzion. She was beautiful. And who was Shlom Tzion? Who was Alexander Yanai? Alexander Yanai was the one that really kicked off the Sadducees. There's a very famous story. Alexander Yanai did not believe in the oral tradition. And one of the most famous stories that's recorded in Talmud Sukkah, you have on Simchas Beis HaShoeva, which is the great celebration that takes place during Chol HaMoed Sukkos, where we pour water onto the Mizbeach, onto the altar, sort of cleans it out, I guess you could say. And it's a tremendous celebration. People back then didn't really understand it, except for the Chachamim. Nowadays, we understand that water is compared to Torah, and it's about the pure acceptance of Torah. Wine is always something that's connected with understanding. It affects you. Yeah, it changes you. But Torah is pure, it's raw, godliness, and the pouring of the Mizbeach is like pouring it onto our world and receiving the Torah. There's a whole lot of chassidus behind it. When it comes to Sukkot, we'll talk about it. But he believed he didn't want them to pour. He was going to pour it on the Mizbeach, onto the altar, so everyone's standing around dancing, and they're looking to see, here comes the Kohen Gadol, Alexander Yanai. Now, they probably didn't really like him, but he appointed himself the Kohen Gadol, and he was the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, for all intents and purposes. And what does he do with the water? Instead of pouring it onto the altar, he pours it onto the ground, which is an affront to what the Chachamim and sages say, that it should be poured onto the altar. Everyone takes their esrog, and they chuck it at him. Hundreds of esrogim get chucked at him. He didn't die somehow. And what did he do? He turned around and he slaughtered everybody there. He killed everybody there. That was not going to be good.
Wait, Rabbi.
Yeah.
I heard, we learned this in the what do you call it? Not the Gemara, or a Chaim, before Mariv yesterday.
Oh wow.
Or no, maybe it was the day before or something like that. But I thought everyone pelted him with the esrog and then he died.
So it doesn't seem like he died over here. From what I've gathered, he will die soon after this. But he is the one. But he told everyone. The accepted opinion is that he turned around. He's the one that said everyone should be killed, and then they started slaughtering everybody after this, and that's when everybody really had it with him. But he's going to die very soon.
Did they pelt him with esrog?
This is from, I got this, Elio Quito. Yeah, so this is yeah, he seems to be
he
didn't die just yet. He didn't die just yet. According to this.
All right.
He then killed the crowd. Okay, then he ended up, at this time he started burning notes also. So a lot of people, we have this, maybe there's different explanations, but at least this is the one that I follow. A lot of people think that the oral tradition was always passed down orally, meaning literally orally, that you had to only speak it. It's not true. We spoke about this before. You couldn't codify the oral tradition, which means you couldn't systematically write it down, but everybody had notes. You would go to a class and you'd write notes down, and et cetera, et cetera. This is what Reuven Margolius said, which seems to be a very accepted opinion amongst world Jewry. When Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi wrote down the Mishnah, it seems like what he did was he said, everybody bring your notes, and then I'm going to codify, I'm going to put them all together. And certain notes are not going to be added in, but they're going to be extra, like outside. You can use them as references. And those are called brises. For those of you that study Torah, Gemara, know exactly what I'm talking about over here. It seemed like at this period of time, Alexander Yanai made sure that all of that stuff was, as much as he could, he got his hands on it, burned it up in a fire. So then he dies. Maybe it could be that he was killed. I don't exactly know. Either he was killed or he just died. I don't exactly know. Shlom Tzion then takes over as queen, and she's amazing. The Gemara tells us that nature, the physical nature of the world bloomed and was bright and it was clear. It grew strong and beautiful. And she started up the Sanhedrin once again. So Alexander Yanai, not just Alexander Yanai, but Alexander Yanai really took it to the house. he removed the Sanhedrin. He took the sages out of their position so they wouldn't have a lot of power, which the Romans are going to do later. The Romans believe that if you can stop the central government, then the whole country would fall apart because they saw Judaism as a nationality. I used to walk down the streets. I was one of those Friday boys, which I don't know if you guys have ever seen them. They put on tefillin on people Friday and they give out candles for women to light for Shabbos candles. So for a number of years, I was in Manhattan and I was on the street and we had like an RV called a mitzvah tank. And I was like I was always parked right in front of the subway, whatever. It was a very busy station on 54th or something like that. We had some very interesting stories. But whenever you would ask an Italian if you were Jewish, so you'd stop people and say, excuse me, are you Jewish? If they look Jewish, even if they didn't look Jewish, we just ask anybody because you would be surprised. Stop people. Anytime you ask an Italian, if you asked, I don't know, somebody from Bulgaria, are you Jewish? They would say, no, I'm Christian or whatever. If you ask somebody from Bosnia or whatever, they're like, I'm Muslim. You ask an Italian, he says, no, I'm Italian. Anyway, he looked at us as the same thing. They looked at us as a nationality. They didn't look at us as like a religion. It's kind of funny, actually, now that I think about it. Rome, Italy, they still look at us as a nationality. I'm telling you, stop someone Italian on the street, ask them if they're Jewish, they'll say they're Italian. So she had a 10-year reign, and she put the Sanhedrin back together, and things were pretty good, only for those next 10 years. She dies around the year 60 BCE, and the situation in Israel implodes. There's another Yehuda II, and a Yochanan II, and they fought it out over the throne. So we keep having these Yehudas and Yochanans fighting over for the throne. And this ends the Hashmonean kingdom. Basically, once they start fighting with each other, they end up killing a lot of themselves, and the Hashmonean family just basically implodes. That's the end of it. Now we're in 65 BCE. Pompus Magni of Damascus saw that it was time that Rome was going to come and take control of Judea. It was a very weak period in time, so Rome didn't really want to put up a fight against anybody. They weren't interested in fighting. They were more interested in the way that what's his name that we spoke about earlier, Cyrus. Yeah, you guys do you, and we'll try to and pay us a tax. We're not interested in just like coming and taking over and killing everybody. If you're not going to do what we say, if you're not going to pay us a tax, then we won't come and kill you. But for the most part, if you could just pay us our money and then read our books in school, we'll be very happy. But they saw Pompus Magni saw an opportunity that it was extremely weak in Israel and he can completely take over. And the Jewish people actually invited him to come because the war between Yochanan and Yehuda got so bad, which kind of repeated itself. And this is when the Gemara tells us about the idea of sinas chinam, that the Second Temple period was destroyed because of baseless hatred. This is really what it's talking about. It's talking about this period of time. So the year about 60 BCE, that everyone was just trying to kill each other. And Pompus Magni famously marches in with his army into Israel, and they come into the Holy of Holies. He opens up the Holy of Holies, and what does he see? He screams out, nothing is here. I don't see any God. I don't see anything going on. He didn't die. And he declares Rome is in town. Julius Caesar at this time gets assassinated, and he's taken over by his nephew Octavian, who's really Augustus, and he comes and takes over, and this is going to play a major role. In the year 40 BCE, Yochanan
Robert, a question.
Yeah.
So, you say is it the dispute was between Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi and Rabbi?
No, not Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. No, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi is not alive yet. No, this is talking about Yehuda and Yochanan. These are children of the Hashmonean family.
And it's not Yohanan ben Zakkai.
What?
It's not Yohanan ben Zakkai.
No, it's not Yochanan ben Zakkai. No, not yet. These are Kohanim, secular Jews for the most part. They seem religious on the outside, but they're secretly gambling at casinos on Shabbos. They're yeah. Those guys are not going to come for another 40 years or so. You gotta wait for this.
Okay.
So now Yochanan the second. Yeah. What? Yeah.
I got confused because my son asked me that this weekend and I couldn't tell him.
Oh, okay,
Which
yeah,
one
no,
was?
Yochanan ben Zakkai. This is going to come a little bit, not yet. We're a little bit too early here. We still have to bring on
I'll
Hil.
now ask another question at the end, Rabbi.
Yeah,
Sorry about that.
the Yochanan the second ends up on top, but his friends are helping him out. And Tipito, who is a Jewish general, he was one of those that was converted in Idumea. So it's questionable whether he's fully Jewish or not, because did they really accept it? Were they forced to convert, or did they really accept it upon themselves? Okay, it's up for discussion, and that's going to play a major role in just a moment. And Tipita is a Jewish general, and he helps out Yochanan. And he has a son, and Tipita has a son. Anybody know his name? Herod. And Herod wants to be a ruler. And Tipita dies. Herod sees an opportunity to take over Yochanan, and he has to get an okay. He has to get an okay to take over that area. So he gets an okay from Rome to take over Israel. And he's ruthless. He's a ruthless ruler, but he wants to show his legitimacy. He wants the people to love him. He was a bit of a psycho. He had I guess maybe he was even, I wouldn't say, maybe he wasn't a psycho, but he was a bit bipolar. And he wanted the people to love him, but at the same time, he wanted them to fear him. So what did he do? He forcibly married himself into the Hashmonean family, and he thought this was going to be it. So now everyone will accept me as a Jew, because there was a questionable status. And he was a great builder, which was a very Roman thing to do. He built Masada. He did a major restoration to the Beis Hamikdash. Most famously, he made it into white marble. It said, the Gemara says, if you never saw the second temple, you never saw anything beautiful, because it looked like a snow-capped mountain, right? It's built on Mount Moriah, Har Moriah. If you go to the temple is built on top of a mountain, and it looked like a snow-capped mountain. It was very bright from anywhere. Even if you were coming tens of miles away, you could see the mountain, and it looked like a snow-capped mountain. It was very beautiful. Who was his boss? So he had a boss. So he took over, but he's like nothing more than a puppet of Rome. And who's in charge from Rome? Who's in charge of that area at that time? Mark Antony. Mark Antony was the one that took over Ptolemy's section. Yeah, he was in charge of the Middle East, and he was in Egypt, stooping around with Cleopatra. And then Mark Antony ended up having a war with Octavian at the famous Battle of Actium. For those that want to know, Herod. So Mark Antony ends up getting killed, and Herod then needs to go get, who's the new ruler over there? Octavian. So Herod has to go to Octavian and ask, can I go ahead and become the ruler, remain the ruler of Judea? And he says, sure. And because it's very good for trade routes. This is a period of time they're about to take over they're going to make a census, a very famous census over here. Why did they make a census? Anybody know why they would make a census?
Because they love the Jews so much, they just want to count them like, they count sheep. No, I'm just kidding.
Exactly. That's one of the reasons. But another one was, now I know how much tax to collect. So once Herod says, don't worry, I'll take the census for you, and you'll get your money, all will be fine and dandy. The sages are now the Chachamim are really starting to sense there's the creation of the Chachamim over here. That basically people are looking to the spiritual leaders to be like, okay, things are getting out of control. We mistakenly invited in Rome, and now we have, now what do we do? So the Chachamim are starting to form school, and they're starting to have tremendous influence. The oral tradition is really starting to take form at this period of time. There are schools of study that are being set up, and the first one, according to this, the first one to set up schools was Hillel. Hillel Hazaken, who came from Babylonia, is the one that's coming up. He came up to Babylonia, and he's starting to establish a school here in Jerusalem. He's a direct contemporary of Herod. Herod wanted the help of the Chachamim. He knew that if I really want to have proper influence on the Jewish people, my people, I need the leaders, I need the influencers. I need to go on to Instagram with the influencers and have good face. So he's like, I'm going to do a major restoration of the Beis Hamikdash. You guys can set up schools, I'll get you money, I'll help you out. There was one caveat over here. You always had to have show your allegiance to Rome. So this is what he did, and this is going to cause a major war. He put on the entrance of the Beis Hamikdash the eagles, the signs of like eagles, an image of the eagles of Rome. So anytime you were going to enter inside the Holy Temple, you were going to see Rome, and that is not going to sit well with the people. And eventually, you're going to have what's called the Kenayim. The Kenayim are the zealots, and there were different types of zealots. So let's think about this like in Israel in 1948 or 1947. Let's say before Israel became a state, the state of Israel. You had different factions in Israel. You had Ben Gurion leading what he wanted. He was sort of like, let's invite the Americans in. Let's be very secular, etc., etc. And then you had on the opposite side, you probably had Menachem Begin. Menachem Begin wasn't necessarily a religious person, but he was a very proud Jew and loved frum people. He didn't mind Haredi people. He came from a frum family, more or less. They were in the opposite ends. Ben Gurion believed that we should suck up to the British, suck up to the Americans, and why? Because they'll give us money and we'll be able to survive as a state. Menachem Begin formed the Irgun, which were like terrorists. They were terrorists. That's exactly what they were. They were terrorists. But they believed that nobody should rule over us. We are Jews and we should rule over ourselves. How do I know? The Irgun is very close to my heart because my grandfather fought for the Irgun. He was a sniper, made bombs, and he was a chef. He's like, everybody threw up after I'd make something. But he believed, the idea was like this. My grandfather had a very weird line that he'd say. He's like, there was one thing about killing an Arab, but there was nothing as geschmack as killing an Englishman. Whatever. He didn't want any Englishman out. The Irgun didn't want any outside influence. So their job was to kill anybody that was not a Jew. Get off of our land. This is our land. And this is essentially what's going to happen. Eventually, Ben Gurion ends up killing his own people, right? He ends up killing the Irgun, tried to kill them. He creates the Haganah, the IDF, whatever, and then whatever. This is essentially what's going to happen at this period of time. Way back, this is exactly what happened. The Kenayim, the Zealots, say, to heck with this. To heck with Herod, to heck with the Romans, and they come and they rip down the eagles of the Beis Hamikdash, and Herod goes nutso. And Rome finds out about this, and we're up to the year 0, just about. The Jews, when they saw the people there was always people that remained par, that weren't involved. When the Kenayim, the Zealots, some of these bandits over here, ripped it down, everybody basically said nothing. And that ultimately ticked off Rome. Herod publicly burnt those that he believed participated in it. And this brings us up to the year 0. Herod is going to die, and Rome is about to come in and march in, and there's going to be the beginning of the end, destruction of the Beis Hamikdash in the next 60 years. Okay, so I'll just stop here. Does anybody have any questions? Next week,
yes, Robert.
Well, next week we're just going to move forward from the year 0 to the year 500. So we're going to deal with the destruction of the temple and how things played out, the Babylonian and everything. Yes.
So is that was the time when they burned Rabbi Akiva?
No, not yet. No, Rabbi Akiva is already after the destruction of the temple. We'll get into that. Rabbi Akiva, Bar Kochba, Yavne, Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai. We're going to talk all about that next week. Those guys are going to come into play next week. Right now, the temple.
Last question.
How did the ark get lost?
What? Who was that?
How did the ark get lost?
Is that Yael?
Yeah, she wanted to. She kept asking me this morning. She wants to know how the ark got lost.
Oh, the ark.
Oh yes.
Which ark?
That's what my son was asking. How did it get lost?
Okay. So we actually didn't get to that because we're going to get to that in a much later class. We're going to go back in time. But how did the ark get lost? The ark is not lost. The ark is where it's been since it's been there. So before the destruction of the first temple, they moved the ark deep down below the temple. It's there today in Jerusalem, somewhere in some secret room. If you dig underneath the temple now, which they do, They see stairs. There's all these stairs and these rooms and these mikvahs. There's crazy things going on underneath the temple, underneath the western wall. Somewhere deep in there is a room that stores the ark. And we learn during the second temple, the ark has to be in its place. The ark has to be, in order for you to make a temple and serve as sacrifices, the holy ark has to be where it needs to be. What does that tell us? The ark wasn't in the Holy of Holies, right? It wasn't there in the second temple. There are two places the ark is allowed to be, in the Holy of Holies and in the secret room that King Solomon built, and it's there today. The ark is in its place, which tells us that the Holy Temple was never fully destroyed. It was never fully destroyed. So it's there today. Yeah, you can go. Actually, somebody asked the Rebbe, should we go and find it? If we know where it is, I think I know where it is. Should I go and find it? And the Rebbe said, if you find it, what are you going to do with it? Just leave it. And
Wasn't that Indiana Jones?
yeah, Indiana Jones found it somewhere in Egypt, though. Yeah, he found it.
No,
And look what
the
happened to
real-
those guys, right? So it's somewhere in Washington D.C., somewhere in a storage. In storage.
The real life Indiana
Right.
Jones.
Oh no! Oh, the real life Indiana Jones. That guy. No, I maybe it was him. Maybe you're right. You know what? I don't remember. That was that guy. That guy was far from being the real Indiana Jones, by the way. Big. I was a bit bummed. Yes. So the ark is somewhere underneath the Holy Temple right now, where it's been for the
So
past
what
3,000 years, 2,000 years. Yeah.
what was it that they siege when they killed the first temple, when they destroyed the first temple? What did they take? Like they say that they took a lot of gold and
Yeah, they took all the stuff.
all the,
Yeah, for sure. They took
all
all
the treasures.
They took everything. And then Cyrus gave it back. They took everything, all the menorah, the lamps, the tools. Cyrus gave it back. And then we had to come back to Persia.
Even the ark.
Pharaohs kept it.
Even the ark. He took even the ark.
Yeah, they didn't take the ark. The ark was already
Okay.
removed. The ark, about 100 years before the temple was destroyed, was put down deep below.
Ah, thank you, Robert. Now I can explain a lot better to my son. He's like, I
Okay.
don't know. I'm trying to figure out.
All right. Good. Okay, everybody. Thank you for joining. We'll see you next week.
Thank you, Robert.
No problem. Peace and love.